Hello? This is William Owens, back in my studio once again. Although, this time I'm not sure if I ever really left. Thinking back, this week just didn't seem real. Like it had more meaning to it. More, significance. Friends, if you choose to listen, or if you feel compelled to listen, or if you're being forced to listen, then listen well. For I have quite a strange tale for you this evening. It all began with some sort of turbulence in the fabric of space. At the time, I just so happened to be sitting on the lip of the doorway, watching a particularly vivid nebula twist away between the tips of my shoes. There was a jolt. It felt like we hit something, even though nothing was there. I quickly got to my feet and was reaching for the doorknob when it happened again. A bump, a heavy vibration, and I was thrown forward into the void. I gripped the doorknob in my sweaty palm as the sound of static howled in my ears. The field of stars I could see beyond the studio seemed to flicker and lighten, blue skies and sunlight bleeding through cracks in the darkness. I don't remember letting go of the doorknob. I just remember suddenly feeling soft dirt beneath my knees, and when I inhaled, the scent of freshly cut grass. Then, I passed out. I awoke in a field, barren but for a crumbling red barn. It looked like Earth. It felt like Earth. For all I know, it could have been Earth. Crickets hummed in the early dusk. I thought I saw the glow of the setting sun peeking over the tops of the pine trees that ringed the horizon. Nearby, there was a road paved with asphalt and split by a series of yellow dashes. I gathered my courage and set out along that road, into the gathering darkness. After a time, I came to a tiny convenience store, its soft yellow light filtering through smudged windows to illuminate a gravel parking lot and what looked like a red 1960s Volkswagen Bug, the engine of which puttered steadily through the night. Though the light inside was on, a sign on the door read closed. I was just about to knock when a voice spoke to me from the shadows. "Store's closed this time of night," it said. I turned towards the sound and, through the gloom, was just barely able to make out the shape of a young man, aged 19 perhaps. He wore a thick sweatshirt with a fur-lined hood, and his jeans were worn at the knees. For some reason, I just couldn't make out his face. It was blurred, or just nondescript maybe. The stranger continued. "I was just going for a ride down End Road, on my way somewhere. Not sure where exactly." His voice sounded so familiar to me. I was sure I had heard it, many years ago. I'm not sure how I got here, or where I am," I replied, but the stranger interrupted me with a vague shrug. "Afraid I can't help you there," he said, "but if you travel End Road with me, maybe we'll find someone who can." And with that, the young man crossed to the passenger side door of the red Volkswagen. Just before climbing in, he removed a large silver coin from his coat pocket, flipped it into the air, and deftly caught it in one swift motion, his face somehow still hidden from view. I followed without question or comment, and took a seat behind the steering wheel, immediately recognizing the hum of that engine beneath my fingers. "I used to have a car like this," I remarked to my companion, but when I turned toward him, discovered the passenger seat was empty. A little shiver ran up my spine, and I wasted no time in throwing the car into drive and pulling out onto the endless stretch of tree-lined road. I drove for a long time and saw many strange things. The trees in the forest seemed to fade into one another. The road twisted and writhed in the distance. Everything sort of had a sleepy quality to it, as if the road marked the line between waking and dreams. Every so often, I would round a curve, and there would be a flash of scents I recognized. The smell of rosewater and potpourri my grandmother would use in her dining room, or the sound the ice made as it rattled against my bedroom window during the blizzard of '96. There just for half a second, and then it would be gone. After what seemed like many miles, the odometer was broken and only displayed zeros, I began to hear a periodic sound that grew louder as I drove. A whiny sort of squeak, like a door with rusty hinges blowing in the wind. As I rounded a bend in the road, my headlights illuminated the huddled form of an old country farmer who waved at the car lazily, a dazed sort of look in his eyes. The squeaking sound came from an old rusty water pump, which the farmer worked continuously with one hairy arm, spilling a sputtering stream of silt-filled water onto the soggy ground. I pulled the car off to the side of the road and left the engine running as I got out to address the old man.
"Evening,"
he said, the thickness of his accent immediately apparent.
"Nice night for a ride, huh?"
I cleared my throat, nodded sort of pathetically, and said, This might sound weird, but I was wondering if you could tell me where I am." The old man nodded, then absent-mindedly plucked a stalk of wheat from the ground and began to chew on its stem.
First time on End Road, then. You just wake up here or something?"
he asked. I nodded. He nodded back, continuing to work the pump as he gazed off into the distance.
How it happens for most people. End Road's one of those between places. Most folks only end up here when they're on their way somewhere else.
I looked up at the sky, forced to pause for a moment as 3 shooting stars did little loop-the-loops across the firmament. "So how do I get back?" I said. But the old man just shook his head.
Can't get there from here. Gotta follow End Road."
He gave a little nod towards the warm pavement. "All the way to the end?" I said.
"Usually best to see things all the way to the end, ain't it?"
he replied. As I walked back to the car, I heard him shout,
"Be careful. It's weird out there. End Road ain't really a real place, if you know what I mean. Sometimes digs things up what should stay buried."
I waved at the old farmer as I resumed my ride down End Road, but when I looked for him in the rearview mirror, I saw only an old, disused water pump. "Nice fellow," said the familiar voice of the stranger beside me. I wasn't surprised to see him again, sitting in the passenger seat. I didn't think he had ever left, and that maybe I just couldn't see him for a while. Staring down the length of End Road, I thought I could make out just the faintest blue glow reflecting off the horizon, accompanied by the slight sounds of a raucous party. "This is me up here," said the stranger. I followed a curve in the road, and a modest country home came into view among the dense woods. Strands of old Christmas lights lit the wooden porch and threw shadows onto the group of messy vehicles parked in the front yard. I pulled up and parked in the dirt. The stranger sat still for a moment before clearing his throat awkwardly. "I shouldn't be long," he said. "If you'd care to wait for me, I think I might be trying to ride all the way to the end." He stared down the road for a few seconds, before quickly exiting the vehicle and jogging up towards the house, flipping and catching the big silver coin as he went. I left the car running and got out, feeling the brisk winds of fall wind their way through the threads of my sweater. Off in the forest, someone was burning old wood and dry leaves. I heard the distant crackle of fire, and the smell of wood smoke danced in my sinuses. I thought momentarily about home, as a vague tingle of dread began to creep up my spine. This house out in the woods reminded me of something. Or maybe not the house itself, but the sounds inside. The music, the voices, the sound of young people crying out desperately against the cruel devices of reality, trying to knit sense from the tangled webs of relationships and loneliness, of life and death. The wind gusted again, and I shivered in the cold. I reached unconsciously into the back seat of the Volkswagen, my hand somehow knowing what was there before my mind did. I withdrew an old, dark blue jean jacket and threw it on, feeling a familiar cigarette burn on the cuff of the right sleeve. I made a little circuit around the car, trying to keep my blood pumping in the brisk weather, and noticed how cluttered and messy the yard was. Old beer bottles, labels long washed off, stood in stoic piles throughout the tall grass, along with pages from aging magazines and an ancient cracked porcelain toilet. I approached the out-of-place commode. An odd familiarity gripped me as I spied the three objects sitting on its closed lid: a dollar bill, a credit card, and a lighter. Something tapped me on the shoulder, breaking my trance. I whirled to see the familiar yet indescribable face of the stranger. He looked exactly the same, but I detected a kind of weariness in him now, as if the house, or something within it, had aged him. "Let's go," he said. "I don't like it here anymore." I silently agreed, and we both hopped into the car with haste. I was happy to get back on End Road. I was getting used to it now. The way the shades of indigo in the sky and the silhouettes of the leaves on the trees sort of fractured and kaleidoscoped as you moved forward. After a time, I noticed my companion was not well. He was sweating and shivering in equal measure, his fingers wrapped tightly around the silver coin. "Are you all right?" I asked, genuinely concerned for the young man. He turned around nervously. "Maybe you should take me back," he mused as he stared out the rear windshield. Then suddenly, he turned around and planted himself firmly in his seat. "No," he said. "I always go back. I've been meaning to make this trip for a while." He settled back into the chair and closed his eyes. "Where are you going?" I asked. "All the way to the end of this road," he replied. "And from there, who knows?" We drove for a long time, my companion's condition worsening with every mile. The landscape of dense pine trees and winding road continued unchanged until the monotony was suddenly broken by the presence of an old church. A friendly light flickered through the stained glass windows, and I heard the distinct tones of a muffled hymn. A sign posted by the road read, "Sick? Tired? We can help." A fit of coughing erupted from the passenger seat. Instinctively, I started to slow the car, but my companion shook his head and begged me to keep driving. "I think we should stop," I said, but tears rose in his eyes as he pleaded, "Don't stop. Not here. Please." I pressed the gas, and within moments the hymns had faded. The stranger swaddled himself in his sweatshirt and shivered violently. I was again preparing to express my worry when a country store/pharmacy, brightly lit by buzzing fluorescent lights, appeared around a bend in End Road. A red neon sign on the front proclaimed, "Pills to take your pain away." I looked over at the stranger, only to gasp as I saw his eyes, wide open now and full of fury. "What are you doing? Drive, damn you, drive!" he shouted, prompting me to accelerate quickly past the quick-stop drugstore. The stranger never took his eyes off that place, and his gaze retained a look of loathing for many miles. Eventually, the young man relaxed, his flushed face regaining a pallid complexion. "I'm sorry," he mumbled after a while. I just have to do this on my own, you know? I nodded, and together we drove through the night. After a time, the stranger decided he couldn't take it. "Turn around," he said. "Please, let's go back." I stared silently at the open road. "Hey man, I'm gonna keep driving," I said. "I think it's best for both of us." Surprisingly, he nodded. "That's fine," he croaked. "Do you mind if I have a cigarette?" I didn't, and buttoned the top of my jacket against the cold as he cracked the window. Absent-mindedly, I switched on the radio, which spun wildly between frequencies before settling on a station.
1, 6, 7,
My girl, don't you lie to me. Tell me, where did you sleep last night? In the pine, in this cold dark pine, where the sun, it don't ever shine. My girl, where did you go? I was looking the whole night through. In the pine, where the sun don't ever shine, I was lonesome the whole night through. My father was a railroad man, killed a mile and a half from here. They found his head in the driver's wheel. His body was never found. My girl, don't you lie to me. Tell me, where did you sleep last night? In the pines, in the cold dark pines, where the sun don't ever shine. In the pines, in the cold dark pine, where the sun, it don't ever shine. My girl, don't you lie to me. Tell me, where did you sleep last night? In the pines, in the cold dark pines, where the sun don't ever in the pines, in the pines, in the cold dark pine, where the sun it don't ever shine.
How long we drove End Road is hard to say. Felt like days, like weeks, but the moon never set, and the stars still shone pure when the forest finally ended and opened up onto a wide field of dewy grass. "Stop, stop, you've got to stop," my companion said suddenly. I pulled over, wincing as the tires squealed and slid in the dirt. The stranger leaped out of the car and staggered to the top of a nearby hill, then immediately doubled over in the grass, retching and vomiting in a most disgusting manner. Finally, his spasms ceased. He took a deep breath of cold night air, wiped his face, and straightened himself. "It's beautiful sometimes, isn't it?" he said as he gazed out over the moonlit plain. "What is?" I asked. "Everything," he answered. The young man reached into his pocket and again started to flip that big silver coin into the air, catching it each time with learned dexterity. "So what now?" I said. I looked back at the car, but it was gone. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment the engine had stopped puttering. "End of the road," said the stranger. "You know what that means." I didn't, so I shook my head. End of one road, beginning of the next. Exciting, right? He flashed a rather exuberant grin, and the coin went up and down, each time making a little ding as it collided with his thumbnail. I stared out at the shifting stars and the endless stretch of end road that ran beneath them, and, for a moment, I had the most bizarre feeling of déjà vu, like I was staring into a pool of clear but rippling water and seeing my own distorted reflection. The stranger's coin rang in my ear. I turned to him. "What kind of coin is that?" I asked. The young man shrugged. "I'm not sure," he said. "It's not mine. It's yours." And with that, he tilted his hand, flipping the coin in my direction. I reacted quickly, snatching the silver disc from the air, but when I looked up, the stranger was nowhere to be found. I took a step into the moonlight and tilted the coin towards the sky. The raised letters on the outside of the disc read, 1 year. I took another step, and this time felt the familiar carpet from the studio beneath my feet. I looked around, feeling the sharp, hard edge of reality returning to the world. It was a bit like waking from a dream, but as I turned, I swear to you, friends, for an instant, I saw a long, lonely road stretching out behind me, still faintly calling my name. There are hidden places in the world, dear friends. Hidden places that are always occupied by the lost and the forgotten. I think we all walk End Road at some point in our lives, or a path very much like it. And friends, I say, if you ever find yourself on one of those hidden paths, stuck in between, you can always look up to the stars and wave. And perhaps, if enough people look up and wave, perhaps, someday, we can all find our way home. You've been listening to Space Cadet, a podcast written and produced by Andy Fleming and scored by Jules Bonner, featuring artwork contributed by Jesse James. If you enjoyed this show, please subscribe to it on iTunes and like our Facebook page. If you do so, you will have completed a quest, and you may be rewarded with karma, or a mysterious copper currency completely useless in the modern world. Feel free to contact us by emailing William.spacecadet@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks!